Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's PSAT presentation. I'm Ellie, and I'm going to be leading tonight's presentation. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself in a bit, but first I did want to thank Principal Ariana for having us here tonight, and I also wanted to thank you guys. I know you have very busy schedules, so thank you for joining me here tonight for this presentation about the PSAT. Now, I know a lot of you may have many questions already about the PSAT and the college admissions process in general, but hopefully my presentation is going to be answering most of those questions. Now, I'm going to be staying a little bit later after the presentation, so if you do still have any questions, feel free to ask those at that time. So I'm just going to introduce myself and give a brief overview of what we're covering this evening. So, like I said, my name is Ellie. I'm from Westchester, New York. I went to Boston University and studied biology, and I just moved to Santa Monica 6 months ago to work for Revolution Prep in the Client Relations Department. I have also taught SAT group courses and done private tutoring for the SAT with Revolution Prep. So let's take a look at what we're covering tonight. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is why standardized testing matters and how they fit into the college admissions process. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time interpreting our score reports, going through them section by section, talking about the scores and what they mean. Then we're going to move from the PSAT to the SAT, talk a little bit about the structure of the SAT, what information is included on the SAT, and go over some basic tips for success. Next, we're going to have a brief overview of some of the other standardized tests. We're going to talk about the ACT, the SAT subject tests, and AP exams. After that, we're going to talk about where to go from here, how to create a testing timeline for yourself to make sure you're prepared, and also talk about some of your different prep options. So, why do these tests matter? Well, there are 3 main components of your college application. The first component is your transcript. Now, that is your GPA, of course, those are your grades, but it's also about the types of classes you took, whether you took advanced classes, whether you took language classes, and whether you challenged yourself. So, how much time do you think overall you spend on your grades? So, the average student spends about 8,000 hours on their transcript. Now, that's 8,000 hours over 4 years of high school spent at school and after school working on your grades. And that makes sense because it is worth about 50% of your application. The other component of your college application is all the different activities that you're a part of. Now, this can include jobs, sports, clubs, volunteering, any other activities outside of school that you spend time on. So how much time do you think the average student spends on those kinds of activities? So the average student spends about 1,000 hours on those activities. And that makes sense as well. That's a lot of time, but it is also worth about 20% of your application. So the last component, of course, is standardized tests. And how much time do you think that the average student spends preparing for standardized tests like the SAT, ACT, or subject tests? So, the average student actually spends only about 10 hours preparing for these exams. And what can you get done in about 10 hours? Well, you can probably do a couple practice exams. You can do some practice questions from the review book, maybe some practice questions online. But of course, this section is actually worth about 30% of your application. So it's worth a lot more than 10 hours of time. It's worth putting in a little bit more effort so that 30% of your application can be outstanding and really impress colleges. Now, of course, I'm not telling you to spend thousands of hours preparing for the SAT, but actually doing just about 40 or 50 hours of prep for the SAT can significantly improve your score. So that is why standardized tests are so important, because they can have a huge impact on your college application. So now let's talk about the PSAT. The PSAT is the practice SAT, and for a lot of you it was your first exposure to college admissions testing. So for everyone, it was really great practice. It was a great way to get used to the style, the length, and the structure of a standardized exam for college. For juniors, actually, it's also a great way to qualify for the National Merit Scholarship Program, which you can learn more about through your college counselor. And the PSAT is a great way to figure out where you stand, so that you know how much preparation and what areas you need to prepare for the SAT. So let's take a look at this breakdown of the PSAT. Now, of course, the PSAT, as I said, is a very long test. Maybe it's even the longest exam you've ever taken. It is 2 hours and 10 minutes long. So let's take a second to reflect. How did it feel taking this exam? Did you get tired? Did you have time to finish every section? Did you think it was easy or did you think it was hard? Now let's look at the format of this exam. So as you can see, the PSAT switched very quickly between sections. Each of the sections was only 25 or 30 minutes. So take a second to think about if you like that style of test. If you do like switching rapidly between sections, then the SAT might be a really great choice for you. If you didn't like switching sections so rapidly, the ACT might be a better choice for you, as it's structured very differently than the SAT. We're going to talk about those two exams in a little bit. Now let's take a look at your student score reports. So finally, we're going to take a look at your scores. As you can see, the PSAT was scored out of 3 separate sections. There's a critical reading section, math section, and the writing section. And each of these sections is scored between 20 and 80 points. So our sample student here got a 50 on the critical reading, a 52 on the math, and a 44 on the writing section. That's not the only important information on this page. Beneath your score, you're also going to see your score range. So this is the range of scores that you would probably score in if the student were to repeat this test without any additional prep, so with the same skills and the same knowledge they went into the first time. So our sample student here, their score range on the critical reading is between a 46 and a 54. So if our sample student repeated this exam, they'd probably score again within that range. Underneath your score range, you're going to see your percentile. And what this information is telling you is how you compare to other students. So for example, our sample student is in the 55th percentile for critical reading. Our sample student scored better than 55% of college-bound juniors. So a lot of parents will ask, is this a good score? Is this a bad score? And there's no easy way to answer that question. It really does depend on where you want to go to school. A great way to find a score that you want to be aiming for, or the range that you really want to score in for a good score, is to pick a few schools you're interested in, go to their website, and see the average scores of the previous freshman class. Now, if there's a specific school you want to go into, you really want to try to get your SAT score around where the average student who's accepted there is scoring, and that's a great way to figure out where you're aiming. So, now that we've seen those separate scores, let's take a look at your total score. And the next part of your score report is going to give you your selection index, and this is just the College Board's fancy term for your total score. So our sample student's selection index is 146, and that's just the math, critical reading, and writing scores added together. And you'll notice that this part also has a percentile. So this is your overall percentile for the entire exam. Our sample student has a 47 percentile, which means that our sample student scored better than 47% of college-bound juniors. So this looks a little bit different than an SAT score. So to transfer a PSAT score to an SAT score, it's very simple. All you're going to do is add a 0. So our sample student, if they took the SAT, again, without any additional prep, would probably be scoring around a 1460. So now you know your scores, and that might have been all you wanted to talk about, but let's take a look at the other aspects of this score report that the College Board has given you, because it has a lot of really great information on it. So the next page is the skills breakdown, and this is going to give you your areas of strength and also your areas that need improvement. So for example, our sample student might be thinking that they really want to pull up their critical reading score. Well, looking at the critical reading section as a whole is a very daunting task, but you'll notice that this student scored correctly only 2 of 8 organization and ideas questions. So this is an area where this student really needs a lot of improvement. But you'll notice that this same student got 8 of 10 reasoning and inference questions correct. So this is an area where this student is a lot stronger. And of course, this is a great way to focus your prep effort. It's a lot easier to focus on, areas that you need improvement rather than trying to tackle a whole section, which, like I said, can be very daunting. You can really just use this skills breakdown to figure out the areas that you need the most improvement. The next part of our score report here is the question by question section. So you'll notice that this part is breaking down the exam question by question. And this is a very great thing to look at if you actually have a copy of the exam with you, which you can get from your school. And you can also look at the actual PSAT questions you got from the College Board website. So you'll notice that this part of the score report gives the question number, it gives the correct answer, it gives the answer you chose, and it also gives the difficulty of the question. So if you're looking back, you can take a look at all the questions you got wrong and figure out what it is that did go wrong. Did you run out of time? Did you forget how to solve that question? Did you maybe make a careless mistake? So of course, another great thing to remember is that all the questions on the SAT are worth the same number of points. So those difficult questions that you may have been rushing to reach aren't worth any more points than the easy and medium questions. If you're getting a lot of those easy and medium questions wrong, it might mean that you need to slow down and spend a little bit more time on them. Now, if you're not missing any of those easy and medium questions, well, that's great. Take a look at the questions in the difficult section that you're missing. Take a look and figure out what it is that you got wrong on those. Maybe there's some concepts you need to review. Of course, this is not at all a fun project. It's very tedious to have to go back and go over the entire exam, especially since, as we mentioned, it is a very long exam. But it is a very worthwhile activity. So parents, I strongly encourage you to sit with your students and do this together. It's a great way to figure out what types of questions give you trouble so that next time you're more prepared. So now I want to take us from the PSAT to the SAT. So the SAT is 95% the same content as the PSAT. It's the same types of questions. You're going to see sentence completions and long reading passages again on the SAT. The style of the questions and the content is very, very similar, but there are some very important differences between the PSAT and the SAT. So the first difference is that the SAT is slightly more difficult. There's going to be some harder math concepts and also probably some harder vocabulary words. So overall, the content is slightly more challenging. The second difference between the PSAT and the SAT is that the SAT does have an essay section. So you'll remember on the PSAT that there was no essay. On the SAT, there is going to be a 25-minute essay. And the third and biggest difference between the SAT and the PSAT is that the SAT is much longer. The SAT is almost 4 hours long. So think about all the focus and the endurance you needed for the PSAT. You're going to need even more focus and even more endurance on the SAT.